I was rather apprehensive when the book first came out, which with the title "Not the End of the World." But actually, it's an absolutely brilliant book. It is so stacked with every aspect of food growing and food production possible. Now, that doesn't surprise me because I use Hannah's website a lot. It's an amazing, amazing resource. Absolutely incredible.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Climate Emergency Forum. I'm Regina, and I'm your host, and today we're going to learn how not to eat the planet. Listen, we have just one planet, everyone. We don't want to devour it in one big gulp, do we? I don't think so. This is a very positive show because we are going to explain that there is hope yet for planet Earth, our one true planet, the green emerald in the solar system that we depend on. And we are paying homage to Hannah Ritchie's book, Not the End of the World. So, it doesn't have to be the end of the world. As many of you know, I'm a climate reality leader. I was trained by Al Gore. I received that training several years ago. And one of the things that he said was, it's not whether or not we can do things to save the planet. We know what we need to do. It's whether we have the will and whether the politicians have the will to do what we know that we need to do. And there's so many different ways that we can heal this planet that we've used so unjustly. I know it's a really difficult topic, so I want you to hang in there because no one wants to be told how to eat. And we're not going to do that. We're just going to give you the information and let you decide, how you want to move forward with this information. I do believe that every little bit that we do is very beneficial. And if we do nothing, it's completely detrimental. So I personally will congratulate anyone who makes small moves to, I hate to say decrease their carbon footprint, because we all know by now that that's propaganda from British Petroleum, but to do things that are of benefit to the planet. Let's put it that way. And we know that there's so much we can do. I have this thing, and this is sort of ancillary to the topic, but I'm very, very opposed to bottled water. Why? I don't think water should be monetized. I think whatever we need to live, such as breathing and drinking water, these are the least we need. It shouldn't be monetized. I don't want to pay for air. I don't want to pay for water. So there's that. But when you look at the process of bottling water, you've got this plastic container that has a lifespan of thousands of years. It's bad for the planet. It's much better if you have to carry one of those, I don't know, everyone's really excited about these Stanley Cup things. I don't have one, but I think they're made out of metal, or a Yeti. I know they make nice thermoses. If you can just carry that around and refill it wherever you go and not buy plastic containers filled with water that have nanoparticles in them of plastic, that would be great. Now, of course, we need more than water. We also need food. I'm in the United States, and so I go to a supermarket, not necessarily where I live in New York City. We have tiny markets, but if you go out in the suburbs, these stores go on and on and on. My God, they have entire aisles filled with various cereals that you absolutely don't need to eat. All kinds of cuts of meat, cheeses, and these are the things that we need to cut down on if you are of that mind. Meats and cheeses, and we're going to get a little bit more into it. But one of the most detrimental forms of foods that we can cultivate and consume is beef. Why is it dangerous for the planet? Because for some reason we have a voracious appetite for beef. It requires a tremendous amount of land use and a tremendous amount of water to grow this beef. And I know that we've discussed this even if you are a meat lover, to have beef or lamb, which is also very difficult for the planet to sustain, not as often as you currently do if you just cut it down to, say, twice a week as opposed to 3 or 4 times a week. Every little bit makes a difference. I'm going to get into the nitty-gritty of some of the things that we're growing on the planet and the detrimental effects and what we can do to counteract them as we move on a bit later in the show. But now I'm going to turn it over to my wonderful colleague, Dr. Peter Carter, and hear what he has to say on this topic.
Yeah, thanks, Regina. I was rather apprehensive when the book first came out, which with the title "Not the End of the World." But actually, it's an absolutely brilliant book. It is so stacked with every aspect of food growing and food production possible. Now, that doesn't surprise me because I use Hannah's website a lot. It's an amazing, amazing resource. Absolutely incredible. You know, there's nothing that comes close to even comparing with it. So if I'm looking for some information, some percentages or whatever, and I can't find it anywhere else, I always end up to Our World in Data. I remember reading, oh, I don't know, 25 years ago, Robbins's big book, Diet for a New America. And at that time, I was sort of getting towards vegetarianism. But when I read the book, it just blew me away. So we've known the fact that meat-heavy diet is, well, there's no future if we continue with this meat-heavy diet. I don't know about reducing things. You know, I did a lot of work in addiction when I was in medicine, and it's actually easier for most people to absolutely cut things off completely, like drugs and alcohol, go cold turkey. It seems to be the way that works. She's vegan, like me, but she says don't use the word vegan or don't promote veganism or something. So I found that hard to understand. Now I was absolutely pleasantly surprised that Hannah is only the second person on the planet with me. That's so Hannah's very good company on how to actually approach right from the beginning emissions, particularly from food. And I decided to make things simple years ago. I just say that emissions from our civilization, our society, come from two main sources. And this is exactly what she says in the book. It comes from fossil fuel production and it comes from food production. And she intimated, which is quite correct, that if you add everything up with industrial food production, so it's industrial energy production and industrial food production. It's really big. It's not so far off the emissions from fossil fuels. She has a discussion in an essay that is in there, I think, in which she says, yes, fossil fuels are important, but you cannot stabilize the climate. You cannot come close to stabilizing the climate if you don't look at food production emissions as well. She infers, which is quite right, that people are aware, of course, of fossil fuel emissions, but not very much aware of food emissions. So for that reason alone, her book is absolutely brilliant. The other book that I read on the same topic was, it's called, what's it called? World at Peace or A Peace Plan. It's by a man called Will Tuttle. I used to live on a farm in England and we had cows and I milked cows and stuff like that. But when you talk about what people call animal agriculture, right? When you talk about industrial food production, it is a completely absolute different thing. The production is amazing, but from my point of view, the treatment of the other animals is absolutely abhorrent. It's just awful. Now, he doesn't go into ethics, so that's fine. But I think we need I think we need a resurgence of ethical thinking in the world. So the other reason why again why I really like the book is that yeah, it's brought up a whole new discussion, right? There's lots and lots of people talking about climate change, talking about emissions, and talking about and maybe learning for the first time the amount of emissions that are in food production. And she actually describes what would happen if we actually all went vegan and we didn't pay attention to fossil fuels. It won't make much difference to the future at all. I think probably more and more people understand that meat, the livestock meat industry, is a big source of methane. Unfortunately, although there was a sort of indication, particularly in Europe, that meat consumption was sort of tailing off, meat production worldwide is going up phenomenally. It's never gone up as fast, I don't think. It's going up very, very fast indeed. And that is, of course, the Chinese people and also the other so-called developing nations in Asia. They are copying, are really damaging, dangers nowadays, habits of having to eat meat with every single meal. I want to say I came across an amazing paper recently. It was published just a couple of years ago. And the title of the paper is Rapid Global Phase Out of Animal Agriculture Has the Potential to Stabilize Greenhouse Gas Levels for 30 years and offset 68% of CO2 emissions by the end of the century. So if the entire world did completely get off meat, which was the sort of experiment that the authors did, the effect is absolutely enormous. And it happens practically immediately. They have, the graphs, they've modeled it, and all three greenhouse gases actually come crashing down. CO2 doesn't come crashing down as much as methane and nitrous oxide, but even so, it does. The other thing I want to mention is that I just want to mention that the models that have been used for projecting what is going to happen to food production from climate change are very, very problematic. Let me put it like that. Their results are skewed and they're very optimistic for the global north and northern hemisphere, and they're misleading. So I'll end with that.
Thank you so much. Yeah, the diets around the world are definitely changing towards a more Western model of eating. And of course, we also see disease rates rising a great deal as well, matching those of the West. We also have, I forgot to mention this at the top of the show, we have a special guest. That is our producer, Charles Gregoire. And he's going to offer us some of his thoughts. He's really into this book and he's read a lot of it and done a lot of the research. And I want to know what you think about this book and about what Hannah Ritchie has to say about not eating up the planet. What are our hopes? What do you think? Do we have a chance here, Charles?
Yes, thank you, Regina. What I would say is the strongest point of her food chapter in the book, and we've called our presentation today, the name she gives to the food chapter, How Not to Eat the Planet, is she gives a very nice sort of narrative of how our agriculture has evolved over time. And of course, she starts with some very big fundamentals, like basically one of the key fundamentals with our agriculture is nitrogen. Nitrogen is the key component in the production of proteins. And she explains how we struggled with that over the early part of our civilization. We would grow crops on a piece of land, but then find that it became unproductive after a while. So we would just move on to another piece of land. And slowly we evolved methods that would restore some degree of the nitrogen in the soil. And that provided the ability for people to sustain themselves in one place on the land. But what she kind of eventually comes to is that in our modern civilization, our ability to feed such large population, I mean, we're over 8 billion now, and they're projecting that we're going to get to around 10 billion before we start to see the population peak and start going down. She mentions the invention of synthetic fertilizers by two gentlemen, Haber and Bosch, and how they eventually, for having invented this process of producing ammonia, which is used in the production of fertilizers, how that led to large gains in our ability to not only grow food, but to efficiently use the land that's required to grow the food. In other words, we could grow more calories, maybe in some cases 3 to 5 times more calories on the same piece of land as a result of the use of these fertilizers. And then she explained another key person in the evolution of our food system, Norman Borlaug, who was responsible for developing very painstakingly many years and effort put into developing various varieties of grains to make them more productive. There is a graph here and how that number has gone up, not only from our use of fertilizers, but also from our use of evolving various varieties of these crops to be more efficient. So we've become very efficient with how we grow food, and in fact, so efficient that we can actually feed everybody in the world today twice over. I think it was twice over in the book, but there are issues in terms of the realization of that, in terms of distribution, in terms of food waste that she goes over in the book. One of the things that she talks about is some of the areas where we really need to try to improve is on, and Peter mentions it, is this idea of eating meat. Meat is a very inefficient way to produce protein calories. And in some countries, for example, the United States, of the grain that they grow, only 11% of it is used to feed humans. So to feed livestock in the US, 46% of the grain is used to feed livestock. And amazingly, 35% is used to produce biofuels. That I find is incredible. There's many other insights in the book, but what I find is it's very easy to read, very easy to take in, and it starts at the fundamentals and builds up. So you can build a good understanding of how our food system works and how you as an individual can make choices to have an impact. In fact, I would say your food choices potentially have the most accessible impact on the planet than any other choice you can make in your life. So I'll leave it at that, and we can expand on it a little further later in the show.
Well, thank you for that, Charles, because I really like this idea of empowerment. So many of us feel a lot of despair, a lot of sadness. Some people feel hopeless and helpless about, what can I do? It's true, when you have these huge multinational fossil fuel industries and we're up against them, what can we do? We can do something, and it will make a difference. Now, I understand, Peter, what you had to say about going cold turkey in regards to meat. I'll be honest, that's what worked for me. I did try to be vegetarian for quite some time, and it was really difficult, but finally it took. The truth be told, I haven't missed meat, and I just don't. I know that there are some people who are able to moderate their meat consumption. I'm happy not to have it in my life. One thing I also want to talk about, and Charles, you touched upon this, is using grains as a mediary to other food. For example, growing crops to feed animals so that we can then eat the animals. But this is, as you mentioned, terribly inefficient in so many ways. For one thing, we need to raise a lot of land. That is, we need to bulldoze a lot of land if we're going to continue to grow cows so that people can eat them. This is why, of course, the Amazonian rainforest is in great trouble, because a lot of people in Latin America and the Brazilians love their meat, and so do Americans love meat, and of course Canadians too, by the way. So when we do that, we're really, really destroying, as we call them, the lungs of the planet. It takes a lot of water to grow. It takes about 21 gallons to grow an ear of corn. And you should think about how much corn or other grains that something as big as a cow can eat. Well, it's a tremendous. So it takes a lot of water overall to produce the hamburger that so many people enjoy. So these are things that are very important to consider. I think it's very interesting that if you look at countries that are not wealthy countries, for example, countries in Africa or India, for example, most of the food, or shall I say, most of the food crops that they grow go to feed human beings. I would say, for example, India, about 10% of the food crops go to feed non-human animals, which will then be consumed. Now, flip that on its head. The United States, only 12% of the food, 12% of the food grown is to feed human beings, and a whopping 44% is to feed other animals, so that we can, again, there's no pretty way to put it, so that we can kill them and then eat those animals. So this is very, very wasteful. I also remember there was a lot of talk many years ago about biofuels and how they're going to save the planet. And this is not so. So a lot of the crop yields in the United States, a little over 30%, go towards industrial uses and biofuel. This is not the saving grace that we had hoped and thought it would be. It turns out that you need a lot of land to grow corn, and as I mentioned, a lot of water, and then using this to produce fuel for cars or other industrial use. It's also not ideal. It's unfortunate, it's just not ideal. So the fuel that we get from corn, this is referred to as ethanol. Now, why is it problematic? The cost of labor is very high. Also, it requires a lot of storage space. It also requires a tremendous amount of water, and you don't have the same, for example, in places that have more arid temperatures, it requires even more water. And so when we use land, it's a question of what are we going to use land for? Are we going to use land to grow food to feed animals? Inefficient. Are we going to use land to grow food to feed cars? Inefficient. The most inefficient way, the best way for the planet to survive, and as a matter of fact, for us to survive, because it just so happens to be the healthiest way to live, is for us to produce food with high crop yields that we then directly consume ourselves. I do want to say that many people worry about their protein needs. Please understand that some of the things that we've been told are not always 100% true. No, it's hard to believe. I know for a fact that Americans get much more protein than they need and much less fiber than they need. We need much more fiber in our diets. So with this emphasis of like, I need to have meat, I need to have pork chops, this is not necessarily what you need, but this is what the agricultural industry has told you that you need. And I know, Peter, that you're very well of this topic, especially in regards to the health effects of over-consuming animal protein. So can you share us a little bit about that?
Yeah, indeed. I mean, the health effects have been known and established and reconfirmed for years and years and years. So when I was in family medicine, it was very frustrating for me, for my patients who were developing coronary artery disease or had a heart attack. They weren't interested in coming off meat with their diet and replacing their diet with healthy, good food that wasn't meat. Now, yeah, there's a sort of criticism of mineral intake and protein intake, but that really has nothing to do with what I call a vegan diet. I mean, you can get all the protein you need and more without having to have animals slaughtered and used for nutrition. I just want to mention that the IPCC 6 assessment was very, very definite, far more definite than any other assessments on the climate change and the social aspects of our diet. One thing they did was they compared the desirability with regards to greenhouse gas emissions of all the diets. I mean, they had about 20 diets that they worked out. What IPCC called vegan was way on top, and it was like 20% better Then the next diet, which was vegetarianism, I was surprised. I didn't realize the difference could be that big. The health aspect, it's really, I think, a tragedy that the developing countries, particularly China. China's now the biggest food producer in the world, of course, and the biggest food exporter in the world. They have adopted the mechanized, chemical-intensive agriculture of the West, and so that's why the meat consumption is going up and up and up. But a far more important issue, I believe, is the question: how much can we produce with non-animal and non-industrial, chemical agriculture? How much can we produce with the alternatives compared to that agriculture? So a few years ago, I looked into how productive the United States food production system is. It is absolutely astounding, totally astounding how much food they can produce per area with the system that is very, very well established now. Organic agriculture is supposed to be, according to the research, as productive as the big agribusiness. But there was a paper out recently which pointed out that and Hannah does mention, she said, it's not always best to eat locally. I think from the point of view of a social aspects, it's best to eat locally. But oh my God, she really has dug into these numbers. It's quite amazing. And so she has a caution there. As I said, we do have studies which show that organic agriculture can produce as much, and certainly as much protein, etc., as the industrial model. There's evidence that eating locally and eating organic actually could be, in many situations, which I won't go into, as greenhouse gas intensive as the big agribusiness. So Hannah's right, it's not quite that simple. With respect to, I couldn't find anything. Charles might correct me on this. I couldn't find anything in Hannah's book or in Our World in Data. Our World in Data is Hannah's site, right? It's absolutely unbelievable. It's a fabulous resource. For me, it's probably the best resource out there for food and all kinds of other things, particularly power production, right? So if you want to learn everything about energy that you could possibly imagine, go to Our World in Data. It's going to be there. So that question of can we replace? Well, we have to, because as she explains, the greenhouse gas emissions resulting from our mechanized agribusiness are huge, right? There's so many things. The chemical discovery of the Haber-Bosch process, or splitting ammonia and producing nitrogen, of course, was like a miracle. It was a great achievement of science, of chemistry. But it's left us with a huge source of nitrous oxide. Now, nitrous oxide is number 3 greenhouse gas, but you cannot stabilize climate, nor can you stabilize the oceans if you just concentrate on 1 or 2 greenhouse gases. It's just not possible. And although nitrous oxide is number 3, a Global Carbon Project did a recent analysis of nitrous oxide, and yes, it is increasing. It's increasing above the worst case scenario, and it has already started to become a feedback issue. So the Global Carbon Project confirmed the research that has suggested that as we are warming our soil with our ever increasing amounts of greenhouse gases and heat up in the lower atmosphere, the soil actually is producing more nitrous oxide. So finally, I guess my final point would be just to repeat that Hannah's, this book is so valuable because nobody wants to talk about climate change anymore. I don't know whether other people have noticed that, but we've reached a level that I anticipated, unfortunately, years ago, where the impacts of climate change would be so severe and so widespread, it would be more than difficult for the average person to sort of take a look at it. and investigate it. But we owe it to all the children of the world. We owe it to all future generations of humanity that we at this moment must make climate change, and that means food, our absolute top issue to be researching, reading about. My God, the books are out there, there's no shortage. Because the big reason for that is that now we know, there's no question that our governments are going to continue to push fossil fuels as hard as fossil fuels can be pushed. That's our future with respect to our governments. There's absolutely no question about that. So therefore, it becomes even more a survival issue of us all individually to educate ourselves on climate change. My one criticism of Hannah would be perhaps she delves into things a little bit too much. She has a lot of numbers and a lot of discussions. So a lot of people would have to, I think, read over her information on food in particular several times, but that's no reason not to do it. So yeah, go to our world in data and go to all the other sources. We must become experts on greenhouse gases, because if we don't, the future is, let me say, highly in question. Today it's not. Today it's not. We can transform rapidly. This paper of 2021 of the rapid phase out of animal agriculture and complete switch to a plant-based diet. Absolutely amazing. So we still really, the science is right that we can still do it. I don't know about 1.5C. We're going to go over 1.5C, and that's going to hurt a lot. So thanks to Hannah Ritchie for her wonderful work on our world in data, and for bringing back a general discussion on issues relating to climate change. There was one particular thing that more than impressed me on looking over our world in data crop yields, which she runs from about 1960 up to 2022. So our world in data keeps very up to date. That's the other thing. Looking at the United States, there is a huge drop in food production 1 year. Huge. And that, of course, is 2012, the unprecedented year of United States heat and drought. It was an awful, awful summer, the worst by far. I mean, we're going through terrible situations with the United States now. So we have to stop these extreme weather events, because inevitably they're going to completely overwhelm our agriculture productivity. And of course, the IPCC has said that that's happening already. So information, our world in data, the book, absolutely amazing.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Peter. I really, really appreciate your take on that. And I want to go back to Charles. And one of the things, Charles, you had mentioned the importance of nitrogen, fertilizer, how we're able to generate much greater crop yields with this. And it's very true. It's kind of like, as one of our scientist friends would say, a devil's bargain, however, because we do have to admit that there's a lot of pollutants that also come out of that. We see a lot of nitrogen runoff during storms. It also leads to various pollutants in the air. So I'm wanting to know your thoughts on that. It's like a trade-off, and your thoughts on your other thoughts on the book and the chapter in general.
Thank you, Regina. You mentioned the cons of fertilizer use. I think that what Hannah mentions in her book is we are getting progressively smarter and smarter regarding how we use fertilizers and how we use them efficiently. She mentioned that we actually reached a thing called peak fertilizer use, where the use of fertilizers has stopped increasing. And that moment is called peak fertilizer. I'm thumbing through the book to find the graph where that's shown. You can certainly find it either in the book or in our world in data. But that is a key thing. And I think As our technology advances with the use of AI and with various agricultural drones and various techniques, we can be more careful about how much fertilizer we use and when we apply it so that it lessens its impact on the environment. But the other point, though, is that fertilizer is primarily a product of our fossil fuel economy, because you need fossil fuels right now to produce the amount of fertilizer that we require to keep us all alive. And that's a reality you can't get around. But there are scientists working on replacing using fossil fuels to produce ammonia. There are other ways to produce ammonia in a green way, and this has to progressively be brought online to replace the necessity of fossil fuel use in the production of ammonia. Now, the other thing I want to now take the time to do is maybe just I'm thumbing through the book here. There's so many very useful charts, and one of the charts I'm looking at right now says shifting to plant-based diets could reduce agricultural land use by 75%. And she has graphs showing various scenarios of how we could reduce that land use. So right now we use 4.13 billion hectares of land to produce food, and 2.89 of that is used as pasture. It's pasture land use, whereas 538 million hectares for animal feed and 700 for actual human food. So if we actually went, she has various scenarios that where we reduce our meat intake, with the ultimate being, if everybody went vegan, of course, we'd go from 4.13 billion hectares to 1 billion hectares. We could feed everybody. So that's like a quarter of the land use it would go. So imagine 3/4 of the land we're using now. We would be able to assign it back to nature, to re-wild the planet. That's amazing. But even a moderate reduction in the consumption of meat, especially beef and lamb, could lead to a fairly good reduction of land use from what we have now to half. We could use half the land if we cut out beef and lamb. And there's many others. So I would encourage our audience to get the book and to take a good look at that chapter. One of the other things she brings up is the idea of meat substitutes, and they really do have a huge impact on lowering the carbon footprint of meat. So, you've heard of things like the Impossible Burger. I'm very like when traveling, we took a vacation to Cape Cod recently, driving in our Tesla. I was happy to go to Burger King because at Burger King, you can order an Impossible Burger. You don't have to order a beef burger. You can order an Impossible Burger, which is a plant-based meat substitute. And also, if you go to A&W, it's also called the Beyond Burger. So, and these have a tremendously less impact on a carbon footprint. She shows a graph in the book. There's a graph, I think it's graph build a hybrid burger, and the reduction is dramatic. It's if you look at the graph. So she talks about various other aspects like types of milk, for instance, cow's milk versus some of the grain-based milks or nut-based milks, and how that can have a big reduction in our carbon footprint. So like, for instance, alternatives to cow's milk: oat milk, soy milk, almond milk, and rice milk. Another interesting thing I picked up on, I was watching Tom Hartman recently, and he did a little ditty on life extension. People are very interested in living longer, and he shared some of the research. And one of the things that I remember from what he shared is he talked about the various amino acids. And there's a particular amino acid, it's called lysine or leucine. depends on how you pronounce it. Reduction of that particular amino acid can lead to longer lifespan. That the research is supporting that. And it turns out that leucine is primarily found in animal products. So there you go. And Tom said that he's on a plant-based diet for many years. And that's a quick way, if you're interested in life extension, to increase your chances of living longer. So there are many health benefits to eating a plant-based diet. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Regina.
Well, thank you so much, Charles, and thank you for that plug on the Impossible Burger. Now, I have to show my prejudice here and say I do prefer the Impossible Burger to the Beyond Burger. You know, I'm curious, those of you who are watching this, do you notice a difference? Because I really, really do. I just think the Impossible Burger is so delicious. Please share with us your thought on this topic, or if there's another type of alternative meat burger that you prefer, let us know in the comments, because I'm always on the lookout for these types of products. I find them to be delicious. You know, as Charles said, they really, really are helpful. So we'd love to hear from you. And I have to tell you, I found this to be such an interesting topic. And thank you so much, Peter, for recommending Our World in Data. We're going to have the link for you down in the description. And this book is just so interesting. I know sometimes that we can seem, I guess I would say realistic, but some people might say that it's hard to hear the truth sometimes. But remember that there is a way, there is a possibility, there are solutions, there are answers. The thing is, do we want to pay attention to them? Do we want to implement them? And if you're someone who's motivated by positivity, please, please check out this book by Hannah Ritchie. It offers a lot, and it can be helpful to share your findings with your friends who may, you know, be closer to the despair category, and maybe you can help them say, you know, with what you've learned, and say, hey, you know, it's not all is lost. And we can't give in to this notion that all is lost. We really can't do it. We have to fight to the last dying breath, because our mother, our planet Earth, depends on it. She depends on us, and it's the least we can do. For those of you who have joined us and stayed this long, the least I can do is offer you a wonderful thanks. Thank you so much. Thank you for staying with us so that you can learn. Thank you for sharing your experience. And thank you for subscribing if you haven't, because it helps us with the analytics. And we'll look forward to seeing you next time here at the Climate Emergency Forum.